afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Harry. You're in California, aren't you? I'm in the east coast of Australia, so it's very good morning to you from Australia.
That's good, and it's probably evening for a lot of other people. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So today we've got a really special guest in Cyril Bourke. Now, Cyril is an expert in electrotherapy and has basically been involved in this scene for around 15 years, and he's also been part owner of a clinic which specialised in electrotherapy with pretty incredible results, and he also was involved with a lot of the Russian scientists who pioneered some of this work, and much more recently he's been part of the development team from miHealth in really furthering sort of the future of electrotherapy. So welcome, Cyril. Probably a good place to start is, how on earth did you get involved in electrotherapy?
Well, my background was engineering. I used to work for IBM in the United Kingdom, doing industrial engineering and silicon chip design and all sorts of interesting technologies in the sort of mid to late 80s. And I ended up going into the military and going into all sorts of unusual things, working with fiber optics, and I was into the industrial side of the offshore industry. So, and at that point, I have to say, I didn't have any interest in healthcare at all. I was part of that huge industrial machine. And it only became relevant to me when I became ill, and I was actually suffering a whole variety of conditions, partly from the environment I was in and the amount of EMF and poisons that were in that environment, and combined with an accident I had where I suffered an injury to my hand, guillotined 2 fingers, they were put back together, and as a result of that, things were sort of compounding, and it got to a point where I actually had significant health problems that I didn't know how to resolve. And the medical system had given me, shall we say, a set of treatments which just went on and on and on without actually resolving the problem. And
could you put really your hand up so we can see which of your 2 guillotined fingers?
Well, right now you can't tell, can you? You really can't, or hardly. Right?
Were they completely chopped off?
There was all the bone and meat was cut through just here, and I've got full dexterity now. But for close to a decade or so, I had 2 rigid, painful fingers. They literally were permanently rigid, and more than the fact they were rigid, they were very, very pale. The circulation was very inhibited there. The sensation to touch was very inhibited, but they actually throbbed and hurt. So they ached. I could almost monitor. I used to say I could feel the clouds go overhead as the barometric pressure changed. I could feel it in my fingers. So they were sensitive to pressure change. They were just a nuisance, really. They were really uncomfortable, and that went on for so long. And I went down with bowel problems and all sorts of things that at the time I thought were not related. But as you'll learn today, it was all tied in together, and I didn't realize that until I started looking at informational medicine, energetic medicine, and biofeedback and electrical therapy.
So
I was very lucky.
So perhaps just tell us what happened the first time you used electrotherapy, and what that was. I mean, so you had 2 fingers that were totally rigid that had been guillotined, and then they applied electrodes to your fingers, or what?
There was a handheld device that was originally designed by the Russians for the space program, and it had been released in about 1986. It was released, and it was at the time the most advanced handheld biofeedback device that had been developed, and it was very effective. They placed it on my hand, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I literally saw circulation coming up through my fingers. And within minutes, I started to get sensation. We saw the blood come up through the nails. They had been reconnected. And from a science point of view, I realize now that when they sewed all the nerves together, the axon wasn't connecting fully. That's the center of the nerve that carries what we perceive to be the electrical signals. And
how did you think of that at the time? Like, did you I mean, obviously you had a very traditional engineering background, where you've been an engineer on oil rigs and a scientist working at IBM before that. I mean, did that sound completely unbelievable that your fingers basically didn't work and been guillotined, and then suddenly you're able to get blood going back through and feeding them again?
Well, it was interesting. I applied an engineering mindset to. Remember, I've been working with fiber optics and communications equipment and all sorts of things. So I had the idea that the connection was not getting communications. For me, it was from an engineering point of view. I just applied a sort of rudimentary look and say, okay, well, the sheath might be there, but the center, like the fiber optic, might have been crushed, and it might not have been communicating. And unlike an innate, piece of fiber optic which has no ability to grow its own fiber, I realized that with time, the body could actually, with the right information, rebuild itself. And I found that signal was just enough information for the body to kickstart that area. It sort of opened that electrical circuit. And for me, in my mindset, that was sort of as a result of what had happened. It sort of explained it to me.
And how long did that take?
Well, it took about 3 minutes to see immediate change in my hand, but physically the body had to get used to moving again. I literally had to work my fingers and stretch them and get them going, exercise them, because the fingers literally hadn't been operated. And then working them and exercising them bit by bit, they all came back together. Now, I had been trying that for the previous years and had never got a change that was happening. I'd had huge amounts of physio and ultrasonics and all sorts of traditional therapy to try and get the fingers working, and nothing worked. 3 minutes from a biofeedback device, and suddenly it had woken up. So it was providing information to the body in a manner that it was receptive to. So it wasn't just being applied to the body was accepting it. And that made me really look at what was involved in that signal. And as a scientist, I got oscilloscopes out and started studying it. And to be honest, it was a life-changing event. I actually never went back to the oil industry, and I studied the technology that I'd been exposed to and suddenly started recognizing that I had a real interest in it. And I, within a year, I was actually a therapist, and of course, I just applied an engineering mindset to it.
Yes, I mean, earlier you described how it wasn't just your fingers that you were getting symptoms with. You also had all of these digestive problems, and how soon did they start to go away?
Well, I had been given some very strong drugs that you had to get special approval from medical boards to provide to me. They were very expensive drugs, and they were giving me them for effectively a bleeding bowel, continuous bleeding bowel. And that was a really uncomfortable situation that was just continuing for year after year. And the drugs, they weren't actually changing it in a significant way. They were just reducing the amount of flow. Every time I tried to take myself off these drugs, literally there was a huge letdown and very uncomfortable, and I literally had to go back onto them. There was no way of coming off them. Now, within days of treating my fingers, I started feeling better in many ways, not just my hand. I started feeling in multiple ways. I've just felt different. And I actually bought one of these devices at the time, and I started treating my abdominal area and my hand as well, bringing it back to life, so to speak. And within about 3 weeks, I had stopped taking those particular drugs that they had given me. And this is something that I had done many times before, trying to take myself off them, and had always gone through the same pattern of all the symptoms getting very, very bad. And in this case, all the symptoms had completely stopped, and they never came back. Literally, I could do anything. Oh, I could drink whiskey, have a curry. I could do anything that you couldn't do when you had a really bad bowel problem.
And literally, was this the next day, or a week later, or a month later?
It took about 3 weeks for me to sense enough change in my body to actually decide I wanted to come off those drugs. And I was told by my gastroenterologist, he said, "Oh no, please keep taking those drugs. And, that's what you need to do for the rest of your life." And that wasn't a solution that I wanted. And months later, I still wasn't on the drugs. I still was feeling absolutely fine. I didn't have any of the symptoms. And we actually had a surgery to check. They put a camera up me as usual, and all the conditions were gone. And all these things, all these internal conditions that they'd been monitoring for years, they had been eradicated. They weren't there anymore. So that further gave me reason not to continue with the treatment I'd been taking. And I had simply been using biofeedback on the body. It had woken up repair processes.
Wonderful. And so from that, I mean, that totally changed your life, and you ended up getting into TENS and biofeedback research, didn't you?
I did. I couldn't just use the device. I wanted to know how it was working, what it was doing. And I found that there were lots of layers to the electrical world, so to speak. It's a bit like listening to an orchestra, music, etc. If you hear sound, but every sound is different, so to speak, and it has a different impact in the way you feel about that music, so to speak. Well, electrical signals, they're not just a buzz. They are many, many layers of sound and rhythms and patterns, just like the variety that comes out of a musical orchestra. Now, the traditional TENS machines I found were just big steps, up, down, and they caused an electrical interference with the body's natural processes, but they were never accepted into the body as innate
You mean more
signals.
Rather similar to Western medicine's painkillers, it just blocked a signal intermittently, rather than trying to trigger a healing response.
Yeah, they're not androgynous. They weren't accepted by the body. The body didn't think it was its own signal. It sees it as an outside event, and as because of that, it can be distracted, but it wasn't triggering the systems of repair, and that's something that I very quickly started to hone in on. And I started doing research and started reading and basically looking at all the different things. In fact, I pulled along some examples today. Here's a book, right? This book is from 1925. 1925, Low Voltage Currents for Physiotherapy. It's done by Frederick H. Morse, MD. And in here, there are lots and lots of descriptions.
Is he related to the Morse code guy?
Well, they used a Morse generator, but I don't know whether it is. I think Morse code was developed quite a bit earlier than that.
I say we should probably, for the audience, explain the difference. Well, explain what TENS means, and also biofeedback, because they're probably two peculiar concepts for people.
TENS is an acronym, right? It's transcuticle electroneurostimulation. It's a big long word, but it really means a family of electrical devices that when you place the electrodes on the skin, you basically stimulate nerves. And it stops right there. It doesn't have any other sort of meaning. There are lots and lots of subcategories. But when you talk about TENS, it just means it's a device that has stimulation of the nerves. Now, it's a little bit like saying automobile. Okay, that's a description of a vehicle that you can travel in. But it doesn't tell you whether it's a lorry, a truck, a road train. It doesn't tell you if it's a motorbike. It doesn't tell you if it's a Ferrari, a Formula One racing car. It just means it's an automobile. It's in that family. And TENS is very much like that. It's a word that covers a huge number of things. And people write about TENS devices as if it means a particular machine, and it doesn't. It's a family of devices, and within that family there are thousands of permutations, just like an orchestra. So when people look at a pain device that's a low-cost TENS machine, it's normally based on a very, very basic electrical signal that's very cheap to put together, and it isn't endogenous. The body itself doesn't recognize it's providing an internal energy. It only sees it as an external stimulus. And as soon as it can, it'll adapt to it and ignore it. And that doesn't provide us with what we're ultimately looking for, which is a signal that communicates with the body, and the body takes what it wants and triggers its own repair process.
And that's what you mean by biofeedback?
Well, biofeedback is one of those families of the TENS. So biofeedback means that the device will be recognizing a condition, not as in a health condition, but as in electrical parameters. It'll be looking at, let's say, the reaction on the skin, and then it'll monitor a change in that, and in response, it'll change its signal that it applies to the body. So if I touch the body then goes, what's happening in that area? I can feel something. Do I have to change circulation? Is it a threat, etc.? And we keep recognizing the change that occurs, and we keep adapting so the body keeps responding. Now that's an external form of biofeedback where you keep putting a variant in and getting the body to respond. But ultimately, the holy grail is to get a device that the body doesn't even know it's an external stimulation. It thinks its own internal signals, highlighting, come here, let's do some maintenance. And that's what electrical therapies has moved towards, away from providing raw, rough adjustments, trying to poke at a body. They're actually getting signals that the body recognizes. And that's really what we'll be talking about this morning, how those layers of information have been able to get the body to do its own work.
Got you. So what was some of your big insights from speaking to the Russians all those years ago?
Well, I was very lucky because very quickly I understood what was happening within the devices, and I literally took them apart and measured them and looked at voltages and looked at how it's reacting, and then looked at medical work and what was being done at the time related to nerve stimulation, and then seeing it in actual treatment and working out what did work, what didn't work, and trying to analyze why certain things wouldn't work in certain ways. I was very lucky. I mean, I was invited with other therapists to Switzerland to meet some of the top Russian doctors who were using the technology. We shared that experience and brainstormed it. And as an engineer, I was able to really converse with them on a biofeedback level. And in fact, they described me as a spy because it became evident that I more than understood their technology and was actually providing understanding that was going beyond what they were using at that time. Remembering their technology had been developed in the 80s and released to the public in 86, where we were now in the thousands, 2000s, etc., and engineering had really moved on, and that process they were using had stagnated, so to speak.
So I think what you're saying is I think it was to connect back with something you said earlier. You said really the latest types of TENS biofeedback devices are really more in tune with the body, with the body's own frequency, so it can't tell the difference. And basically, you're basically saying a lot of that Russian technology wasn't necessarily in tune, but it's really down to the frequency and the magnitude. And if you can tune that, like if you can emit frequency sets that are similar to or harmonious to what the body is used to, then that's going to be, the body's going to adapt better.
That's it. They're all factors, just like that orchestra. Each element has a different impact. And originally, people were looking at what they call sinusoidal waveforms. So in the 1700s, 1800s, where people had electrical generators, they literally were experimenting. They would have what they call sinusoidal waveforms that would go up and down, and they would check to see what the body would respond and see muscular contractions and myofascial responses and things like that. And as technology developed, they created simpler signals that were closer to the body. And the real step forward in the 80s was that it's a very high amplitude, very short signal that triggers C-fiber response. And that was a massive change from any therapy that had ever occurred before. And they achieved that with some very basic electronics. And you can still see those patents today on the American Patent Office. Now, that was the first really big change in biofeedback, and those devices are still in people's pockets today, and they certainly are a big improvement over what is a basic TENS machine. But as you said about frequency, for example, in other areas of science, Milo Wolf, for example, who worked on the American astronaut work, etc., the moon landings, etc., he had been involved.
He actually invented, he invented a couple of amazing things, but what are they called? Yeah, the CT scan. He was actually the inventor of the CT scanner, but that came from technology. I think they were using some sort of X-ray technology to measure where satellites are, and for all of the calculations to get the original Apollo missions to land on the moon.
Yeah, that's three-dimensional navigation. Space travel, literally.
That was it.
Now that involved a huge understanding of not just navigation things, but the mathematics and calculating frequencies and directional energy. And he found that scalar is a multi-directional energy based on frequencies that they had deduced. In fact, they termed the phrase global scaling because they found that every single useful frequency was related to the next. And the body and the planets and even the weather and the waves on the beach, every single thing, whether it's the pulse of your bloodstream or whether it's the frequency of light traveling and bouncing off a wall, they're all on a global scaling range. Milo Wolf was able to apply that not just for satellites and navigation, but he looked at it in relationship to how the body recovered. Now, the devices that were being used for therapy up until then were using fundamental frequencies, 1 hertz, 1.5 hertz, 2 hertz. And these were electrical devices that were really made up of effectively what would have been originally used for radio and used for television and amplifiers. They were basic electrical devices. They weren't developed specifically for healthcare. They were designed for, or the components were designed for just basic fundamental use. And to get where you needed to go with the body, you needed to look at Milo's work and actually start developing new technologies to provide frequencies that nobody had ever accessed before. And suddenly you're putting information on a carrier that is accepted by the body, not should we say assaulting the body. It's actually being accepted by the body. And that global scaling technology. In fact, I've got a book here. I brought some books out. Here you go. Here's one. This is a beautiful book here. Now, this has Rainer's, I always have trouble saying Rainer's surname.
Rainer Weinhager.
Weinhager. Okay, you say that.
Sounds like Weinhager.
And this is in English, which is great because a lot of the global scaling books are actually written in German, which makes it difficult for a lot of us to read. But understanding the universe through global scaling really has some really great information, and it's one of the few books that is fairly easy to read on that topic. But it shows you the realities of where frequencies are, and that step forward was a huge, significant change for the rate of delivery of information to the body in electrical devices. And Milo Wolf shared his knowledge with your friend and colleague. Peter Fraser. And Peter, being a founder of Nest with you, was able to combine his understandings of body field work, because Peter had been doing 30 years plus of informational patterns, and this was the solution for the carrier wave, how to apply it directly to the body.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the time, basically, we wanted to make this handheld device that could stimulate a healing response in any part of the body. Obviously, we already had the informational component in how we were making infoceuticals. I think there's one over there somewhere. But I think, yeah, the real thing when we were looking at the SKINAR with you is we knew the SKINAR was. I mean, generally the SKINAR works from like 15 hertz up. can't remember, is it up to 2000 hertz? No, 600 hertz. So,
yeah, they've put it on a basic clock of up to about 500 or so. But once you start looking at global scaling, you realise that it's all in the wrong place. It's too bulky, and they're not using signals.
It doesn't really matter. They just do this sweep of signals, and some of it has a beneficial effect, some of it disturbs it, and some probably doesn't do that much at all. But basically, when we mapped the information of the body in onto this frequency map that came out of global scaling, because in global scaling, I don't know if this is necessarily that simple, but it starts down at the wavelength of a photon, and then basically scales up to the size of the universe. But within all of that scaling, it basically sort of jumps up in threes, and there's particular nodes and frequency sets that will resonate with body tissue, and then there's huge gaps where nothing will happen. And if you like, I don't know if you can see my fingers, probably.
Yes, I can see your fingers.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So there's nodes of quite very tiny, precise range, and you're talking, for instance, like from 101.5 hertz to 101.15 hertz. And if you hit it between that very narrow range, in particular, that will have effect on cell mitochondria. But if you hit 103 hertz, it won't at all. And if you hit another, let's say 107 hertz, it'll have a detrimental effect. So it's very very precise and narrow bands, and we basically matched and worked out those narrow bands from the mathematics that had come from global scaling, mapped Peter's information in onto that, and then combine the two, so you get that particular signal that will trigger a healing response, and we ignore all of the other frequency sets, so it can't do anything harmful or just not be particularly effective, which is probably mostly it won't be particularly harmful. If you get the wrong frequency sets, it just isn't particularly effective.
Yeah, that's right. You lose the efficiency, and the body always wants to go into an adaptation process. It wants to adapt, but it doesn't adapt to global scaling because it just accepts it. It just literally it becomes part of the body's function, which is the great thing. I mean, you've simplified it enormously because you've only given us examples of like 2 decimal places, but on some of the global scaling, it's about 8 decimal places. And until the NEST technology came along, nobody was producing technology that was looking at that level of accuracy. And that's one of the huge steps forward that has been pioneered by NES's miHealth device. Nobody's ever built a device that could do and provide specific global scaling frequencies, in addition to using the high amplitude, very short signals that we've shown dramatically improve response, coupled with global scaling. It's just an amazing step forward. And then when you layer on top of it Peter's informational patterns, that just brings you into a new world that's never been available. But wait, there's more, as they say, because instead of just applying it within the TENS family, you've gone on to research PEMF. Now, how did you end up deciding to focus on the PEMF component of the device as well? Because it's a very popular element. Tell us a bit about the history of that.
Well, I mean, it's fairly simple in a way, but maybe we should just explain about energy and information. So I think with what we've described up to this point, when we've been looking at TENS and biofeedback, that's a very, very real electromagnetic signal. When you put the device on your skin, you can feel it. And then there's this other concept of information that we put in onto that signal. Information you can't feel, but obviously you feel the signal, the original underlying signal, the carrier wave. And so, like when we were making it, I I mean, we actually started just making with only tens in mind, and I think, I don't know, it must have been about halfway through the project after a couple of years, we thought, well, you know, the information side can be carried in on a wave, and it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be a physical wave that you can feel. It could be a pulsed magnetic wave that you don't feel, and basically, you know, you should get not quite the same effect, but you should get a similar effect from the information side, i.e. the information will still trigger a healing response. You wouldn't necessarily get the TENS type effect, which is a slightly different effect. And so, well, in short, we tried it. So we basically just disconnected the electrodes and let a huge charge what are they called? Solenoids, transformers. Sorry, transformers. Yeah, so we disconnected the electrodes, let a charge build up in the transformers, you know, underneath the surface of the device, and then let it just discharge just by itself. So it would create a pulsed magnetic wave, and then we basically tested whether information was able to travel a few feet. And lo and behold, yeah, we were able to imprint information a few feet away, and then more important is clinically we were able to get all these clinical results without the device touching, basically just carrying the information on a pulsed magnetic wave. So yeah, it was actually an afterthought, but it was quite a good afterthought, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, look, it's been remarkable. I have to say, I've even got video footage of one of the American practitioners who he actually stood up in a training. When I described to him about the low PEMF carrying information patterns and actually interacting with the human body field, and he was a wonderful practitioner. He was quite confronted by it though, and he said, I'm an attorney of law, I'm a doctor of chiropractic, and I don't believe you. That's what he said. And that was just wonderful, because I said, well, let me help you. And I gave him a miHealth device in training. And I literally, in front of a group of about 40 doctors.
You got that on camera, didn't you? Get that on camera?
I haven't got that on camera, but he came back 3 years later to another training he sat in the class for 4 days so he could tell the class about that event, because it was such a change in paradigm for him. It wasn't in his medical books, it wasn't in his science books. All of that information has been muted in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those funny things, because I've got my little cell phone here. It's not so different to your cell phone. I mean, it emits a wave, you can't see or feel it, and obviously it's carrying information on it, and it's really no different to that, and your cells can pick up information, and you know, they react to it rather well.
That's right. Well, in that case, that gentleman, I gave him a device and I said, look, I would like you to treat me in front of this group. And he took the device, and I have to be very grateful to him because he did exactly what I asked. He took the device and I set up, I forget, an off-body setting of some sort. And I said, just draw the device up in front of me. And I said, when you feel what feels like candy floss, an area of the air that feels like it's got a different density, something different about it, I'd like you to brush that area of air around me and then see what happens. And he did that. He went up down my front and down my spine, and he found an area behind my heart, and he actually treated that area. He found himself actually following this area of space that had a difference. And what it is, in that space, he was interacting with the body field of me, and he was so shocked, it literally made him cry. He was shocked that the device was actually interacting with the body field in the manner that he didn't expect. And that was a big change. And he's used it in his clinic now for many years. He has multiple devices, and he's a big advocate for both on and off body treatment. So in the past, people have used things like Reiki and etherical treatment, where they run their hands around the body, and a lot of the public have had trouble accepting that and understanding it, even though they know it works, or a bulk of them do. But the miHealth device is also now able to interact in that area and deliver specifically.
It's much more systemized and specific because you can select. Well, you can basically select the effect you want, and it's totally going to deliver that information and have that effect. Versus with hands-on healing or Reiki, you're reliant on the practitioner having a strong enough body field to emit enough charge to really carry that information, but more importantly, you're reliant on the mandala or the symbol that they're supposedly holding in their head to have an effect, or you're reliant on their intention being pure the whole of the time that they're treating someone. Which I don't know. I mean, pretty much everyone's minds wander, and if you have a few weird negative thoughts while you're treating your patient, that's not such a good thing. But obviously the miHealth gets rid of that. And I think it's also important to say is like when you're looking at pulse magnetic frequency devices, there are some. It's a little bit different to these. You can get these where you can get these mats that you lie on. You can get these huge devices with rings that sort of shove out 20,000 volts worth of stuff, and you can actually you can feel like shock waves go through it. All of that really isn't. It's
disruptive.
It's disruptive. Yeah, it's disruptive and isn't necessary. The frequencies have never been thought about. The power is like 10,000 times too much. Like the body's. Imagine how delicate a cell is. And then within cells, obviously, all sorts of components within cells, but obviously DNA being one of them. But the sensors within cells are so extraordinarily delicate, and mostly the sensors is actually the water of how water sort of works as this transceiver and transducer around the other organic material. But it's so sensitive. It does. When you whack it with some huge. It's pretty, as you say, it's pretty disruptive, and all it needs is just a tiny little, it's a tiny little tap, like just sending that information. It's fractions. I think it's about thousands times smaller. Less than the phone. Yeah. Let alone I can't remember the name of some of these other things, but you don't. You can see them demonstrated, like if you put a piece of metal on pulsed magnetic frequency mats, the metal will jump up and down like that. That's how strong those fields are. And, that isn't in tune with nature. When they say that those magnetic mats are sort of, I guess realigning you with Earth's magnetic field won't make metal jump up and down like that. It's just a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother thing. This is very gentle and in tune with the body. Maybe we should talk a bit about your clinical experience, because we've sort of missed out on 10 years of all sorts of, I don't know, maybe just tell us something that happened in your clinic, or maybe tell us some of the common threads in your clinic.
What the overriding, like I spent 8 years in full-time practice in clinic, and it was a very, very intense time. We were literally developing protocols and treatment, and the 8 years just went just like that. We were very successful using both the NES system, the scanning system, and using infoceuticals, and we were using biofeedback to really get a sense of what the body could cope with. And we saw things that medically we never expected. We saw things like multiple sclerosis, where you'd have CT scans showing phosphorus burns on the brain, etc. And we'd treat a client, one in particular, it was around a year, seeing dramatic changes in function. But then we went to repeat the CTs to see if the actual phosphorus burns were still visible. And no, they weren't. They weren't visible. And the medical staff actually said that the 9 previous CTs of that person must have been wrong. So there was such resistance to acknowledge change from this type of therapy. It was quite amazing. We had a doctor from the local hospital who was an orthopedic surgeon, and he started sending us patients secretly because he wanted to monitor the type of changes we were getting with fractures that weren't healing. So he would send along patients that literally had open fractures, or I should have said that there weren't an open wound, but there were fractures that weren't knitting, and it may have been 3 or 4 months from the break, and they still weren't knitting. They would send them along to us, and within a month of our therapy, they had completely resolved. And these were things that the doctors were bringing up to us, saying, well, this is why I've come to see you. I want to know what you're doing. And we really did have some fascinating things go on. I treated a lot of rape victims and emotional traumas, people who'd had very significant post-traumatic stress syndromes. And we found that not just in a physical form of support, but the technology actually allowed the nervous system to calm down and discharge problems that were inhibiting physical recovery. So I found that biofeedback didn't just provide an inertia for the body to repair itself. It actually allowed lots of different other things that initially we hadn't thought would react to occur. The body calming itself down, going into its own repair processes. That was very satisfying.
Cool. And I guess, I mean, another aspect we haven't talked so much about is, when you're trying to get someone better, is knowing where to start and what to do, and that's also another. There's many variations or meaning of biofeedback, and obviously the biofeedback that we've talked about to date is basically the device and the body altering the signal so that the body doesn't really adapt to it, so that it can trigger a healing response. But another form of biofeedback is basically where you're basically able to scan the whole body or the whole body field, so you know exactly where to treat. And I know, when you did those 8 years in clinic, I think your first 4 or 5 years you were using the Russian technology, and you would have to manually. And the device did that, which is still pretty amazing. But you would have to manually read the response of the device to the body to then know where to treat. Versus now, obviously, it's all just displayed on a computer screen, and it says, you could treat to the left of the spine, above the shoulder, etc., and it's all considerably easier and more precise.
That's right. The device has, as well as a pulsed electromagnetic field based on global scaling with human body field information, as well as a TENS internal electrodes that can go directly onto the body's dermatome and trigger afferent responses. It's as well as those components, the device operates as a space resonance transducer. So it's actually able to interact with software and gather information and have that determine what the next step of treatment is. And it doesn't matter where you are for that. You could be in the same room as the client, or as we've got in a couple of weeks' time, we've got a lady going to Mount Everest. And from base camp, we intend to do literally a Nest scan using a miHealth device and directing the information back to our software. And we'll be able to provide information about how to directly treat there and then in 17,000, whatever it is, feet, 17,600 or something, feet above sea level.
Let's hope they don't actually need it for real up there.
Well, look, and that's another thing. Nest technology can be used in those dramatic locations, and if you have serious requirements, it's certainly there to help you in addition to whatever medical requirements you need. But it's not necessary to have a significant health condition to make huge benefit. We function and cope wonderfully without recognizing what often is going on inside. And when you do a scan and you use this technology, it will recognize how to optimize your response, get your body operating in a manner that you may not have recognized was possible. So you don't have to be ill at all to make use of one of these. If you want a good lifestyle and live well, then you don't need to be ill to suddenly look after yourself. These devices are here already, non-invasive, easy to use, and they're working out at every scan what is the best thing to optimize that body's response. So Diane Hawkins will be up there and using it, and we look forward to seeing her up there.
No, cool. And also, obviously, we've done a few studies. I mean, there was one that we did in Holland with 251 patients, which actually was pretty incredible. I mean, we were just looking. We were looking at.
I've actually got a post here behind me.
All right.
Just here, actually, it's just here. It's something we have for displays. I'll read it to you. Basically, you had 251 clients, and it was actually across, I believe, four countries. So there's a whole variety of practitioners and doctors involved. And the study showed that in the first session, there was an average reduction in symptoms of above 60%. And by the second session, which was normally done a few days later, you had, statistically, it was a 93% reduction in conditions. And that went from sports injuries through to muscle problems, chronic pain, joints, acute pain, as well as nerve and energy, digestion, stress, skin and bone problems. So it actually showed a huge range of conditions that we typically look at, and all of them were showing both acute and chronic conditions were showing significant relief within just a few treatments. And remember what I said about my hand. I only took literally one treatment to see significant change, and then let the body catch up and resolve that. So even though I was using it in the following weeks, it was really the first treatment that I started seeing change, and the rest was just supportive, letting the body do its thing.
This is a bit shameless, because we are, to be true, we're both involved in the NES company, but being totally shameless. Would you say, out of all the years of being in clinic, have you? Is there anything else out there that gets these sorts of results? And please, audience, don't take our word for it, because we're being totally shameless. But we do recommend you do, go and do your own research and see what else is out there, and check out what we're saying is true or not.
Yeah, look, I mean, I came from the engineering world, and my objective was literally to use the technology that I had found. And then when I researched it, and I was in a very lucky position, because I knew more about electrical fields, electrical conduction than the average person. I knew a lot more, and I was able to understand the data and apply it to biological processes. And then I was able to research, and look, I've got some books here all over the place. There are some fabulous books. You can look up Vibrational Medicine by Richard Gerber. You've got huge resources like Life Force by Claude Swanson, etc. You've got, I mean, I went back, I literally have first editions from 1925 of electrical therapy. So I've really had a good look at it all and applied understanding. You've got some wonderful works. This is a collection of Peter Fraser's work.
I would say, if you're going to have a look at any of them, if you're really into the science of how all this stuff works, read that one. Or actually, that one's far better, because we wrote it.
Decoding. This one here is a very good one. And people can read these types of things and then get a direction to look in. I've ruthlessly tested everything, and I'm still involved now in the development of technologies. And the miHealth is right now being revised again, so we get better displays and more information and a more fluid use of the device for the practitioner who wants to really see what's happening in the dermatomes of the body and try and trigger faster and faster results. So how does Nest compare with anything else? I'm very proud to say
doesn't really compare, does it?
There is nothing else in the marketplace, even down to our manufacturer. They make things for our technology that never existed until we realized we needed them to make our technology work. So just like the greatest automobiles, somebody else designed the wheel, somebody else designed the windscreen, etc. But when you put it all together and it becomes the perfect vehicle for what you're trying to achieve, that's what Ness has done. As Ness will continue to develop that technology, and it's not just an internal team. There are many practitioners globally. There's about 5,000 practitioners globally using Ness who talk to us, don't they? They tell us, Harry, what's happened in their clinic, and we assimilate that understanding into the future of the technologies.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it's probably getting towards a close for today's podcast. I mean, do you have any final little thoughts or questions?
Look, sometimes it's worth always remembering when you're dealing with healthcare, and it was put together quite nicely by Hering, one of the Austrian doctors, 1800 to 1880. Hering said the body heals from the mind, the emotions, the innermost organs. It heals in reverse chronological order. It heals from the head, the neck, the core, and out to the extremities. And that means that you have to pay attention to those priorities and support the body to do its natural functions. And that's what Ness has tried to do in every way. And that's why I think it's been such a successful treatment. And practitioners can get the best results of whatever they're doing if they pay attention to those simple fundamental requirements of the body.